Hello, and welcome to Ralph Reads, brought to you by TURN, United Ronin Networks. My name is R4. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. On this edition of Ralph Reads, I will continue this miniseries featuring Donald Goines, Dopefiend. Let us move this right along, shall we? Let the reading commence. Chapter 4. The warm sun came through the partially open window, tossing silhouettes on the wall. The sound of an angry fly buzzing around his head yanked Teddy back from his drug-ridden sleep and brought him wide awake. At first, he tried to cover his head under a sheet, but the fly continued to buzz until he sat up and stared around his room in a daze. For a brief moment, he couldn't remember where he was. The sound of his mother knocking pots around in the kitchen and his sister's 3 kids playing loudly in front room brought him to his senses. Teddy sat up in bed and reached over for a cigarette. He blew smoke through his nose as he began to plan his day. The first thought that came to him was getting his morning blow. He relaxed as he remembered that Porky had told him last night that he had given Terry a $10 pack to take home. He smiled as he thought about Terry. She would have taken it home so that he would have something to wake up on. How faithful a square bitch could be at times. I'll have to take the bitch to a motel pretty soon and give her some dick, he thought. For a minute, he tried to remember how long it had been since he had taken his woman anywhere, let alone to a motel. Oh well, the bitch should be happy just to be in his company, he decided, tossing his legs over the side of the bed and sitting up. With his morning fix already taken care of, Teddy started to plan the rest of the day. It would be nice to have a bowel movement, he thought, since he hadn't had one in over 10 days. After calling Terry, he decided he'd go into the toilet and make himself have one, even if he had to use his sister's douchebag to give himself an enema. He shivered. The sight of that long stem and the thought of having to put it in his own rectum sent goose pimples up and down his spine. But the idea of staying constipated any longer was out of the question. He had to have a bowel movement. And as long as he kept shooting dope as soon as he woke up, he'd never have an ordinary one. Somebody had told him that the longer his bowels stayed locked, the more dope it would take to make him high. He cursed, picked up the phone, and dialed Terry's number. After the 3rd ring, Terry's mother answered the phone. "Hello, Mrs. Wilson. Could I speak to Terry?" He cursed inwardly as she inquired about his health, his mother, and his sister's children. The goddamn woman would take all morning just asking about people's health. Finally, she yelled upstairs for her daughter. There was a long delay before the sound of Terry's sleepy voice came over the wire. "Terry," he ordered, "I want you to get up and come over here as soon as possible, baby." He remembered suddenly that he still had her car, but decided to hell with picking her up. It was warm outside, and she always kept a few dollars in her purse so she could catch a cab. "What for?" she asked, her voice no longer filled with sleep. "What for?" he cursed. "I want you to bring me the package Porky gave you for me!" He yelled more harshly than he had planned. Terry hesitated for just a second. Her eyes went to her purse and back. The shock of mini self-abuse had worn off, and now the thought of parting with that small package was disagreeable. Suddenly, her mind was filled with a fierce desire to keep the small amount of dope. An unspoken warning ran through her, and she knew she would need it before the day was out. She wet her lips, thinking about taking a small blow now that she was awake. I don't know nothing about a package Porky gave me for you. He gave me some stuff, but he sure didn't say anything about it being yours. And besides, she added, Minnie and me snorted it up last night. What? Teddy asked, not wanting to believe what he just heard. When she repeated it, he could only hold the phone dumbfounded. Finally, it dawned on him that she didn't have any dope. Before the words had completely worked their way into his consciousness, his body began to react to the news. His nose began to run. He sniffed twice and slammed the receiver down as she started to inquire about her car. He cursed loudly. It was that goddamn Dopefiend-ass bitch, Minnie. Dopefiend bitch wasn't shit, he swore. He planted his feet firmly on the floor. All thoughts of trying to have a bowel movement had disappeared. His only thought was where could he get the money for a fix. He stared stupidly at the closet. He had pawned his last suit a week ago, so there wasn't anything left to pawn. He began to dress hurriedly. Something would have to be stolen and sold real quick. His knees began to feel stiff. He knew he was becoming boogie. His mind raced feverishly. He had to have a fix. Suddenly, his sister's voice drifted through the thin bedroom wall. Something in the back of his mind clicked. Bessie was inquiring about the mailman. Instantly it came to him. Today was the day for some of the ADC mothers to get their checks, and his sister was one of them. He thought about stealing the check, but just as quickly tossed the idea away. His sister was too sharp to let him beat her to the postman. Teddy stumbled out of the bedroom into the front room. They lived in a small 3-bedroom frame house. There were 6 of them, his mother, his sister, and her kids, and him. He couldn't begin to remember what his father had looked like. When he was 4, his father was stabbed to death in the neighborhood bar. Since then, his mother and sister had worked, always making sure there was enough food in the house and that the place stayed clean. Sometimes he would steal enough stuff from various stores and bring some of the stolen meat home. Ham, lunch meat, steaks. It didn't matter. Whatever he stole, there was always some use for it at home. Though his mother would complain about his stealing, she always accepted the food. She knew if she didn't accept it, he would only take it out and sell it to one of the neighbors, who were always looking for some kid in the neighborhood to stop off with some hot meat. His sister Bessie stared at him. "Look what the cat drug in," she said coldly. "You better watch your purse, Mama. His nose is running, so he's looking for something to steal." "Why don't you shut your goddamn mouth?" Teddy yelled angrily, glaring at his sister. "You just shut your filthy mouth up, boy," his mother ordered from the clean little kitchen. "I done told you, Teddy, I ain't gonna have you swearing around these little kids like you ain't got no sense. You better get your mind right, boy, or either get out in the streets and stay with them bums you run around with." Teddy stared at his mother. For a moment, he wanted to cry, to be able to lay his head on her huge bosom and beg for help, for understanding. He needed someone to understand the hell he was caught up in. He stared at her short, squat figure and knew she would never understand. Her wide face would fill with concern because she loved him, but she would never be able to understand his being strung out on a habit. "Anything you couldn't control, leave it alone," she would say. She had once liked to drink, but after getting religious, she had quit. She believed firmly that that was all you had to do. Quit. On many occasions, she had tried to get him to go to church with her, believing that once he found God, the desire for dope would just disappear. He turned to his sister. "Bessie, I got to have $5. How about loaning it to me when your check comes?" Bessie snorted. "That's what you said last check day, and I ain't get my money back yet." She glanced out the window for the mailman. "You keep up with my check day better than I do." Bessie looked like a younger version of her mother. She was short and plump with a round face. The only difference was that she had the same golden brown complexion Teddy had, while their mother was dark. Why don't you ask that Miss Fine you're always running around with? She got a job downtown and all them pretty clothes. That's where you ought to be trying to get your money from, Bessie stated, putting her hands on her hips. I got 3 kids to support, and I sure can't take care of no dope fiend. You got that winehead nigga to support, Teddy yelled, losing his control. You just keep on, and he's going to put another baby in you. It ain't none of your business what me and him do, she answered angrily. And at least he ain't no damn dope fiend. Their mother came into the room, tossing her arms into the air. You 2 kids is going to be the death of me yet. Always arguing about nothing while you carry on worse than the little ones, and that's a fact. She spoke to her daughter. You better pay heed to what he said too, Bessie. I don't want you coming up with no more babies. She remained silent for a moment. And you ain't got no money to be giving that man either. If he comes around sitting around here today, I'm sure gonna tell him about it. She turned on Teddy. Ain't you got Terry's car out front? I seen it when I came back from the store, she said, not giving him time to answer. Bessie May, you pay that boy something to take you and them kids to Kmart's so you can buy them some shoes and some pants and stuff. Why, them boys of yours is running around with their feet on the ground. Bessie squirmed. Oh, Mama, you know I can't keep them in shoes. They just run outside and kick cans with them. And a week from now, they'll be done ran so much that the soles will be coming off. I don't give a damn, her mother said unyieldingly. You had them, and you going damn well take care of them. You hear me, girl? You ain't got too big for me to take a strap to. And don't you give me no sass. You always starting something, Bessie said, turning and taking her anger out on Teddy. Their mother walked to the window and looked out. You get them kids ready, 'cause the mailman will be here any minute. Damn you, Bessie said softly so that her mother couldn't hear. I ain't going to give you but $5 to take us shopping, Teddy, she said loudly over her shoulder. Give me the money now, he ordered. I'll be back by the time you get the kids ready. Her mocking laughter drifted back to him. I wouldn't give you the time of day. You must think everybody in this world is a damn fool but you, don't you? She asked harshly. Teddy started to pace up and down the small living room. His nose continued to run. Every 2 minutes, he would yell at his sister to hurry up. Finally, he walked into her small bedroom and started to help her dress the children. He dressed both the little boys while she dressed the girl. Bessie watched him, amused at his discomfort. I don't know why you keep rushing, fool. We can't go nowhere until the mailman comes, she added sharply. What's wrong, Teddy? That little monkey you got on your back done turned into a full-grown gorilla? He wiped his nose on the back of his hand. Don't worry about my thing. I can handle it, he replied arrogantly. She stared at him closely, her eyes suddenly filling with compassion. Teddy, why don't you commit yourself to some hospital? You should be able to get help somewhere. You ain't doing nothing but throwing your life away now. Look at you. I used to be so proud of my little brother. You used to stay sharp, and people used to talk about what a sharp dresser you were. But now, since you've been using that dope, you ain't nothing but another dope fiend. You done pawned all your clothes or sold them. You don't keep your hair done anymore. All you want to do is fill your arm up with some of that dope and sit around scratching and nodding. It ain't none of your business what I do, Teddy answered angrily. You ain't nobody's prize either. All you do is keep your goddamn legs cocked up in the air. Every time some man looks at you hard, you come up pregnant. She flinched as though someone had struck her. For a moment, it seemed as though she would cry. Teddy swallowed and wished he hadn't said what he said, but it was too late. She was hurt and getting madder every moment. The children stared first at one grown-up and then the other. They hadn't understood what had been said, but they knew something was wrong. The sound of their mother calling them interrupted what could have become a very touchy affair. Bessie, here come the mailman, girl, They both rushed out of the bedroom with the children running behind. As young as the children were, they had come to realize that on a certain day, the mailman became very important. It was a day in their lives when they knew they wouldn't be denied when they asked for candy money, maybe a pop later on when they had dinner. Because of this, they looked forward to the mailman too. After the mailman dropped the check off and left, Teddy went out to the car and waited. It wasn't long before he was blowing the car horn, trying to rush his sister up. She finally came out of the house, closely followed by the children. "God damn it, Teddy," she yelled as she climbed in the car. "You ain't got to wake up the whole neighborhood just because you want $5 funky dollars." Teddy didn't reply. He knew that, now they were out of the house, he had better be careful about what he said to her. If she got mad, she would get out of the car and find someone else to take her out to the shopping center. And that would be the last he would see of that $5 bill. He removed a piece of toilet paper from his pocket and wiped his nose. He began to sweat under his arms. The sweat ran down inside his shirt, and he knew that it would have a rank odor to it. If he didn't hurry and get a fix, he would be too sick for a $5 pack to help him. He wasn't worried about getting high. What he wanted was a fix so that he could feel normal again. Later in the day, he would try to hustle enough money to get high, but for the moment, he had only one concern: to get the sickness off. Teddy pulled up and parked in front of the neighborhood store. The white merchant inside cashed all the checks for the women in the neighborhood. He had been dealing with the black people in the neighborhood for the past 30 years. When the city had rioted and people were burning out the white businesses in the slums, the black women of his neighborhood had surrounded the store and wouldn't allow the men to loot. Teddy and his crowd of friends had been there, wanting to take off all the meat, but his mother and sister were in the front of the crowd of women. They stayed up in shifts, protecting the store. The wineheads who wanted the cheap wine free, and the dope fiends who wanted whatever they could get to sell, called the women honky lovers, and whatever else they could think of, but it hadn't done any good. The next day, when the owner came expecting to see his store burned down or looted out, he cried when he found the women sitting out front, joking. The women had displayed more sense than most of the men. They knew he was the only one they could turn to when their check money ran out. He carried them until the end of the month, and longer when some of them had trouble out of their men over their checks. It was not surprising for some of them to owe as much as $60 or $70 out of their checks at the end of the month. Bessie went in and cashed her check. When she came out, she gave Teddy $5. She had been mad at him before, but she knew she couldn't help herself. She had grown up in the neighborhood just as he had. She had seen junkies all her life. Her brother was sick, and she knew it. When she gave him the money, she also knew he would go to the nearest dope house before taking her to the shopping center. Teddy's hand shook as he reached for the money. "Thanks, baby," he said with genuine emotion in his voice. He drove away from the curb without bothering to look. A beer truck almost hit him. "God damn it, why don't you look where you're going?" he yelled out the window at the rear of the truck. When he parked in front of Porky's house, he prayed that Porky wouldn't be out of stuff. He met two addicts coming down the stairs as he ran up. "Is Porky all right?" he asked breathlessly. "Yeah, man, he got some stuff," one of the addicts answered. Bessie waited impatiently in the car. After half an hour, she thought about blowing the horn, but she knew that it would be wrong. It would probably get Teddy in trouble with the dope man if she blew the horn in front of the house. When she had just about made up her mind to blow the horn anyway, she saw him coming down the steps. He came over to the car, grinning. The drug had made another man out of him. He was almost like his old self, friendly and easy to joke with. He slid in under the steering wheel. "I'm sorry, sis, if I stayed too long, but I had to wait until he had cut up some stuff." She sighed. It wouldn't do any good to complain. He had given its excuse and probably thought that anyone would be able to understand why they had to wait almost an hour. The shopping center was crowded when they pulled into the parking lot. Teddy found a spot to park, not too far away, and they all climbed out. Bessie led the way into the store. Just like most women, once she entered the store, she lost all conception of time. Her eyes brightened as she became obsessed with shopping. After an hour, she was still walking from counter to counter. After the second trip around the store, Teddy began to grow restless. "I thought you were going to buy the kids some shoes, Bessie," he asked. "We've been around this dress counter for the last 5 hours," he complained, exaggerating the time. She glanced over her shoulder at him while she and another woman both tugged at the same dress. "In a moment, honey," she said as she got a tighter grip on the dress. Teddy snorted, eyeing the dress rack coldly. They were too cheap to steal, unless he could get away with the whole rack. He watched the other woman's purse and wondered idly if he could dip on her before she noticed him. He disregarded the idea. Ever since entering the store, he had been looking for something to steal, but whenever he got the opportunity, the merchandise was always too cheap to bother with. He promised himself that, before he left, he'd take something to get another blow off of. As soon as the woman turned loose her end of the dress, Bessie lost interest in it and turned away from the dress counter. It occurred to Teddy that women enjoyed shopping more for the sake of snatching something out of each other's hands than for really shopping. The PA system announced a sale on children's clothes. The mention of sale immediately caught the women's attention, and before the speaker had finished, there was a small stampede toward the children's department. Teddy watched his sister amused. She was like a racehorse coming out of a stall. With a firm grip on each of her son's arms, she was off and running in the wake of many of the faster women shoppers. When they reached the sale counter, it was too crowded, so they walked over to the children's shoes. After new tennis shoes were put on the boys' feet, they didn't want to take them off. They started to cry when Bessie ordered them to take the shoes off. To prevent children from crying, she let the boys keep their new shoes on. The little girl decided she wanted to wear hers too, so again she relented. She gave Teddy the old shoes to carry. They started for the checkout counter, but Bessie spotted an opening where the sale was going on and made a beeline for it. "Give me the money for the shoes, Bessie," Teddy said quickly. "I'll take the kids up front so we won't still be at the end of the line when you get there." Without giving it any thought, she removed a $10 bill from her purse and gave it to him. "I'll catch up with you shortly, Teddy. I just want to get a few new outfits so the kids will have something to wear when school starts back." Teddy took the money. As he stood in the crowd of women, he dropped the boy's shoes on the floor out of sight. He kicked them towards the front of the crowd of women. He pushed the kids up aisle in front of him. When he got to the front counter, he stood on the side, not bothering to get in the line. He glanced around him casually. The old pair of girls' shoes were stuck down inside his shirt. With his jacket on, you couldn't even see a bulge. Without any apparent hurry, he started the children toward the nearest door. As soon as they reached the sidewalk, 2 white men stepped up beside him and grabbed his arms. Without any hurry, they ushered him and the children back to the store and led them to an office in the rear of the building. It had been done so neatly that very few people realized what was going on. A little later, when Bessie paid for her articles, another woman approached her as she left the checkout counter. They spoke briefly for a few moments. Then the woman led her toward the office in the back of the store. When Bessie entered the office, she saw her children standing around crying, while her brother leaned up against the wall as though nothing had happened. More ashamed than frightened, Bessie removed all her sales slips and showed that she had paid for all of her purchases. "It must have been a misunderstanding," she pleaded. "Teddy must have thought that I was going to pay for the shoes." The store detectives watched her closely. The crying of the children was beginning to get on their nerves. "We don't have the slightest doubt in our minds about whether or not your brother was planning on stealing those shoes, miss. If he had intended on paying for them, why would he have bothered to conceal the old ones that the kids took off?" Bessie shrugged her shoulders. She felt like crying herself. Nothing like this had ever happened to her before. She was angry at Teddy, but she didn't want to see him go to jail. "Couldn't you let him go this time?" she pleaded. "I'm sure if you do, he'll never come back in your store again." She stared from one detective to the other anxiously. The woman who had shown her the way to the office spoke up. "Could you pay for the shoes?" she asked. Bessie fumbled awkwardly with her purse. She snatched it open. "Here," she said, and held out a $20 bill. "This should be more than enough." The detectives glanced at each other. The older one spoke up sharply. "We'll give him a break this time, but if we ever see his face in here," he said as he stared at Teddy, "we'll lock his ass up so fast he won't know what happened." Teddy sneered as Bessie followed him and the children out of the store. She believed that everyone in the store was watching them, and she blushed furiously. Before they had reached the car, her shame had turned to anger. "Give me my money," she demanded sharply. Her voice was full of scorn and anger. Teddy felt the $10 bill in his pocket. "I lost it," he stated coldly, and continued on towards the car. Chapter 5. It was a hot, muggy day, and the sun was shining brightly through the windows. Terry put the vacuum cleaner in the closet and went back into the front room. Their home was a lovely house that ran in the $20,000 bracket. Her father kept the lawn beautiful, and her mother kept the inside of her house immaculate. The living room and dining room floors were covered with light brown wall-to-wall carpeting and boasted matching dark bronze French provincial furniture and golden drapes. The dining room table had a matching china cabinet. All gave the appearance of utter good taste. "Terry," her mother called from the kitchen. "Have you finished yet?" "Yes, Mom," Terry replied as she flopped down on the couch. "You want me to make some chicken sandwiches for your lunch today?" "Don't worry, Mom. I'll probably buy something to eat at work. Lately, I haven't been having any type of appetite." "You can say that again." Again and again, her mind returned to the dope upstairs. She had got out of bed and come downstairs to get away from the temptation, but the yearn for the drug was getting too big. All the while she had been cleaning up, her mind kept returning to the heroin. It was becoming a fixation she couldn't quite get away from. Never before in her short life had she ever had such a desire. It was a nagging, constant thought, something she couldn't just dismiss. She sniffed and wondered if she was coming down with a cold. For the past half an hour, she had been sniffling. She promised herself that she would absolutely refuse to snort any dope for the next week. Yet before the promise had left her mind, she found herself climbing the stairs towards her bedroom. Her mother's voice drifted up the stairs. "What is it now, Mother?" she asked sharply. She couldn't keep the irritation out of her voice. Her father's voice reached her, even though it was muffled by the walls of the bathroom. "When did you start talking to your mother in that tone of voice, Terry?" he asked mildly. "I'm sorry, Father. I just have this awful headache today, and everything seems to annoy me," she yelled back down the stairs. "I'm going to lie down for a few minutes, Mom. If you want anything, I'll be in my room," she added. "My head is killing me." Before she could hear her mother's reply, she was in the bedroom. Terry locked the door behind her and rushed over to her purse. Her fingers shook as she took out the heroin and poured it onto a small face mirror. Quickly, she rolled up a dollar bill and made a quill. With trembling hands, she began to snort the poisonous white powder. She made a face as the bitter taste came up in her throat. But it soon passed, and she began to feel the soothing effects of the drug. Terry lay back on the bed and put her feet up. She slowly lit a cigarette. Her eyes closed and the cigarette dropped from her hand. Her head jerked up as the fire burned through her thin blouse. She caught the cigarette as it fell on the floor. Suddenly, there was a sharp knock on the door. She flinched at the sound. "Terry, are you in there? What's the idea of the lock? Are you dressing or something?" Her father sounded concerned. "You're not sick, are you?" "No, Daddy. I was just changing my clothes," she lied easily. Terry took off her blouse and opened the door in her bra. "Ain't it kind of early for you to be up, Daddy?" Seeing his daughter half-dressed caused Terry's father to hesitate in the doorway. He had on a t-shirt and an old pair of work pants. His hair was turning gray in spots, while his brown eyes showed crinkles in the corners. He was a pleasant-featured middle-aged man who looked as if he found a lot to smile about. His complexion was the same as his daughter's, while his physique was that of a man in his late 40s, just beginning to gain a pot gut. Terry sat down on the edge of the bed. "What do I owe this pleasant surprise visit to, Mr. Wilson?" she asked teasingly. He smiled at his daughter. His eyes were mild. The sight of his lovely grown daughter filled him with delight. He had always been a frugal person, more from nature than from economics, so he had been able to give his wife and daughter anything they might want within reason. He was proud of his home, car, and most of all, his little family. "Your mother wanted to know if you would have time to drive her to the supermarket," he asked. Terry bit her lip. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I let Teddy have the car so that he could go job hunting this morning," she answered, knowing that Teddy would never bother looking for a job. He frowned. "That's something I've been wanting to talk to you about, young lady. Do you think it's wise to keep allowing Teddy to have your car?" Before she could reply, he continued, "Even though the car is in my name, I've always treated it as though it was yours, Terry. But lately, I've been having second thoughts about the matter. I just received 2 tickets in the mail this week, parking tickets, and I know they weren't yours, unless you started hanging around on brush in those slums." "I meant to pay for those tickets, Daddy," she replied, lying again, "but they just slipped my mind. I was down there waiting on Teddy and left the car sitting in a no parking zone too long." Her father stared at her curiously. "There's one more thing I want to bring to your attention, Terry. I told you when I signed for that car that it was your responsibility to pay the car notes on it. Yet, I got a notice in my room that says you're overdue on a payment." He continued, "Now, I don't want to get in your business, but you don't even have to pay rent, so I can't imagine what you're doing with your money unless you're starting to take care of that lazy young man you run around with." "I'll take care of that note this week, Daddy," she answered angrily. "I don't know why you and Mama always think I'm giving my money away. I happen to be buying some winter clothes, and I just forgot the car note." Her father turned away from the doorway and started down the hall to his room. "Just make sure you don't forget it this week, or I'll make sure you don't have to worry about it anymore," he answered her loudly over his shoulder as he continued on his way. "Damn it! Damn it! Damn it!" she swore as she slammed the bedroom door. "I lost my high listening to him complain," she rationalized to herself as she picked up the mirror and raked up the little bit of dope left on it. After snorting it, she sat back on the bed and tried to recapture the high, but it was no use. "I can't even get a decent nod in this house without somebody bothering me," she thought. Terry began to pace the floor, thinking of where she could get the money to buy another blow before going to work. She picked up the phone and dialed Teddy's house. After talking to Teddy's mother, she hung up the phone, more angry than she had been at first. There was one thing she was going to do, she decided. The loaning out of her car every day would have to come to an end. If she kept the car, it wouldn't be any problem running down a quick blow, she thought coldly. Terry jumped up and walked over to her closet. She removed a pink miniskirt with matching blouse and laid them out on the bed. She debated over taking a quick bath, but the dope had her feeling lazy, so she just dressed quickly. Downstairs in the living room, she found her mother waiting patiently for her father to come down and take her to the store. Terry wrapped her arms around her mother's plump neck and kissed her. "Moms, dear, won't you loan your only daughter $5 without Daddy knowing it? I got to get to work, and Teddy's got my car." Her mother stared at her fondly. She was the kind of woman who will always be friendly and courteous to strangers. It was a rare occasion when she lost her temper around anyone, including her family. Frequently in the past, Terry had wondered if anything could shake her mother's decorous behavior. "Terry, I don't know what's your problem, dear, but I just gave you $10 the first of the week, and here you are back again asking for more." She tried to look sternly at her daughter, but failed. Both of them were small-built women, and the mother looked more like an older sister than a mother. "Mom, sweet, I'm buying the sharpest outfit. I just had to pay down on it. Now, if you want me to be the poorest dressed girl at work, I'll just start wearing blue jeans." Her mother sighed. It was hard to say no to her only daughter. "Here, girl, but don't you let your father know about it. He's having a fit about that car already. And if he finds out you keep spending money, well," she opened the purse, The only small bill she had was a 10. Terry reached over and removed it from her hand. "I'll give this back to you this weekend, sweets. Don't worry about a thing." "Don't worry about me, Terry. You just be sure to get that car note in the mail so your father can sleep." With a backward wave of her hand, Terry ran for the door. "Don't worry, Moms. I'll take care of everything." Once she reached the sidewalk, she began to breathe more easily. She walked swiftly, keeping one eye open on the street, watching for someone she might get a ride with. The young boy who lived down the street blew his horn at her, and she waved him down. She ran over and jumped in his car, not giving him time to say no. "Billy Blanks, I ain't seen you since last winter," she said quickly, giving him her most charming smile. He smiled back. "Hi, Terry. I've been busy working midnights and going to college in the daytime." His voice was filled with pride. "How come you ain't in school today?" she inquired, endeavoring to keep the conversation flowing. "I had to get the brakes fixed on this old wreck, so I just took the day off. I needed too bad to get me back and forth to work to take a chance on having an accident." Billy lit a cigarette and then added, "I saw your father out to the plant the other day, and he was telling me that he hadn't missed a day in the past 3 years. "That's just like him," she replied. "He hasn't too much to brag about, so it's a big thing for him to keep a good record out at that damn plant." Billy glanced at her curiously. "That's a funny remark, Terry. I think your father has a lot to be proud of. And besides, he's just about the best liked man out there." Billy hesitated. "Did he tell you they made him the leader of the midnight shift?" "Big deal," she answered sarcastically. "The next thing you'll be telling me is he's a foreman." "That sarcasm doesn't become you, Terry. You really have changed in the past few months. I suppose you would like for your old man to be more like your boyfriend Teddy," he said coldly. "Do we have to argue, Billy? All I wanted was a lift to the east side, but I guess with your new opinion of me, that would be asking too much." Billy drove silently for a minute, staring straight ahead. "No, I'll take you," he answered sharply. Terry crossed her legs and began to scratch her thigh slowly. She lit a cigarette and settled back against the seat. As they drove smoothly along, she found herself nodding. Her head would slowly drop on her chest, and then she would snatch it back up. The quietness of the car had a drowsy effect on her. Billy's voice came to her suddenly. "If you keep scratching your leg like that, you're going to start it to bleeding." His voice had the keen edge of a razor. She glanced down at her leg. Without knowing it, she had ripped through her stocking and put long scratch marks on her thigh. "You don't miss a thing, do you, Billy?" "Not when an old friend of mine has started to turn herself into a tramp by the quickest route possible. Of all the things in the world you could have been, Terry, I never thought you'd end up being a dope fiend." Her head snapped up. "What the hell are you talking about, Billy? I don't use any dope." Her denial was weak. He laughed harshly. "You tell that lie to Fool Man Shoe, or somebody who doesn't know any better, Terry. I've been watching you ever since you got in this car, and all you've been doing is nodding." Terry snorted. "Nodding hell. I'm just sleepy from staying out all night. You've been reading too many books at that damn college you go to. Man, you better come back down to reality and get out of them damn clouds." There was nothing but pity in the look he gave her. "You aren't fooling anyone but yourself, Terry. My older brother used to be an addict before he got killed trying to stick up a store. I can remember as though it was yesterday the way he used to act when he got high. We used to sleep in the same bedroom, and I used to watch him cook up that stuff before he shot it." Billy slowed down for a light, then continued. "Every time he got high off it, he acted just like you're doing, nodding and scratching all over the place." His voice filled with scorn. "You tell Teddy the first time I catch up with him, and I don't give a fuck where it's at. I'm going to jump off on his ass and break one of his legs for putting you on that stuff." "You ain't none of my daddy," she answered with as much sassiness as possible. "And don't you go bothering Teddy just because you're bigger than he is. I don't know nothing about what you've been talking about, Billy Planks, and if you say something to my father, I'm just going to tell him you lied." She stared at him and then added, "I'm going to tell him that you hit on me, and I wouldn't give you none." "Give me none?" Billy laughed coldly. "All I got to do is wait 6 months, then ride down on Brush or John R. and pick you up off the corner and spend $3 with you. You just try waiting 6 months, Billy, and see what you get. She turned her back on him and said, if that's all you can talk about, I don't think we have anything else to discuss. As they continued on in silence, she debated whether or not to have him drive up in front of Porky's house. She decided to have him drop her off 2 doors away. She reasoned that he wouldn't know the difference between Porky's or Joe Blow's. When they got to Porky's Street, she saw Teddy parking in front of the dope house. She grabbed Billy's arm. Don't you start nothing with Teddy. Please, Billy? She held his arm, waiting for an answer. She knew Billy's reputation as a fighter from their high school days. It wouldn't be anything strange for him to get out of the car and knock Teddy down. Billy glanced at her and saw the fear in her eyes. He had been in love with her ever since their early school days. They had ridden the same school bus, and he used to wait in the snow just for the chance to walk to their bus stop with her. When the other boys his age had started to date, he had been too busy working after school selling papers, then later working in a supermarket. All the while he worked, he had kept one burning idea in mind: make a success of his life, and one day she would be his. In the past half an hour, he had seen his daydream destroyed. Once he became aware of her use of drugs, he knew that there was no room in his life for her. He had watched one life ruined because of heroin, and he knew he could not stand to see another person close to him go the same way. The sight of Teddy and the idea of his having made an addict out of her was almost too much. He fought to control himself. He realized that if he got out of the car now, he would lose everything he had worked for. All the nights he had spent in the factory, all the sleepless days in school. There was no doubt in his mind that if he got out of the car, he would end up killing Teddy. He smothered the black rage that consumed him. Billy reached across Terry and fumbled the door latch open. Okay, Terry, he managed to say, fighting back the lump in his throat. It's your play, honey. Just be sure to take care of yourself. She stepped from the car. Okay, Billy, and thanks for the lift. Terry, he called her name, bringing tears to his eyes. Terry, if you ever need something or someone, call me. Don't forget now. I'll come to you wherever you're at. Just call. She forced a smile. She wanted to leap back in the car and lay her head on his large shoulders and ask for help. She looked up and saw Teddy bearing down on them, so she quickly closed the car door. Thanks, Billy, she called after him as he pulled away from the curb. Teddy glared angrily at Billy as he drove past. He grabbed Terry brutally by the arm and snatched her around. What the fuck was you doing with that square-ass Billy? She jerked her arm loose. If you'd leave my car alone, I wouldn't have to bum rides. Before she knew what was happening, he slapped her upside the head. Don't you talk to me in that tone of voice. You save all your smart-ass answers for your square-ass friend. Without thinking about it, she looked down the street to make sure Billy hadn't seen Teddy strike her. It wouldn't do at all for him to see that. If he had, she doubted she would have been able to stop him from whipping Teddy. Teddy slapped her again. Bitch, don't be looking for that nigga. Ain't nothing he can do but get you both killed out here in the street. Teddy glanced in the direction Billy had gone. For all of his threats, he didn't really want to see Billy coming back. After making sure Billy was nowhere in sight, he slapped her again, then wheeled on his heel and walked towards the dope house. Terry rubbed her palm over her cheek and followed docilely behind him. Your days are numbered, she murmured softly under her breath. Chapter 6. The department store was just about empty. The doors have been closed for the last 20 minutes, and most of the sales girls were getting rid of the slow shoppers. Terry glanced at her watch nervously. It was 10:15, so it wouldn't be too much longer before she could get away. For one of the few times she had loaned Teddy her car, she wasn't worried about him not picking her up. He had told her to steal something to sell, and she had taken 2 Kimberly knit dresses earlier in the evening and put them in her large pocketbook. It was the first time she had stolen something, and her nerves were acting up. After she got rid of her last customer, she rushed to her locker and slipped on her fall coat. She removed the purse and started towards the door. She hadn't stolen the garments because of Teddy's constant nagging. She had taken the dresses because she wanted a blow as soon as she got off work. Her anger was still aroused over Teddy slapping her earlier that evening, but for now, she knew there wasn't much she could do about it. "Good night, Mrs. Breeding," she called as she waved at her supervisor. Her legs trembled slightly, but she knew she had gone too far now. If she was busted, it would be before she left the store. She reached the door and began to breathe more easily. As soon as she stepped outside, she saw Teddy double parked, waiting for her. He blew the horn loudly as soon as he saw her come outside. Terry bit her lip in frustration. What in the world had she ever seen in him? He was loud, he cursed all the time. She wondered what it would have been like to have a man like Billy for her boyfriend. Terry ran between two parked cars and stopped. The front fender of her car had a large dent in it. She stared at it, surprised. Before she could move, Teddy's voice came to her. "Come on, goddammit! We ain't got all night!" He glared at her angrily from behind the steering wheel. The passenger door opened, and Snake, tall and dark, stepped out. For the first time, she noticed that he was not alone. The back seat held a couple of other dope fiends. They stared at her curiously. Terry hurried towards the car. She glanced over her shoulder to see if any of the other salesgirls had come out. The last thing in the world she wanted was for them to see the car full of men waiting for her. She blushed furiously and jumped in the car. Snake got back inside, squeezing her in the middle. She stared up at Teddy. "I see you finally got around to tearing the car up," she said, her words dripping with sarcasm. "Damn all that," Teddy replied arrogantly. "It ain't about that. I had an accident, as you can see, so that should cover that shit. What I want to know," he began, "is whether or not you took care of that business I told you to take care of." He pushed the gas pedal down to the floor, trying to catch a yellow light and ending up running through a red one. Two of the addicts in the back seat turned around to see if any police cars were behind them. "Take it easy, man," Snake said in his easy drawl. "We got that hot record player in the back seat." "Don't make me ask you again, bitch," Teddy said loudly, more for his friend's benefit than Terry's. "Did you swing with that stuff like I asked you?" Terry shook her head, afraid to take a chance on speaking. She was so angry that she knew if she opened her mouth, he wouldn't like what he heard. "Let me see what you got," he ordered loudly. "I got to make sure you ain't brought some of that cheap shit out." "What you thinking about, Teddy?" Snake asked lightly. "Terry probably knows more about expensive clothes now than you'll ever know. Ain't you forgetting, man, that she works with this stuff every day?" He rubbed his leg up against hers. If Teddy should end up blowing, he thought, he couldn't think of a better man to get Terry on the rebound than himself. The more he listened, the more sure he was of Teddy losing her. A man didn't treat a woman like Terry like a dog, not if he wanted her. You had to baby them, keep them interested, and never go out of your way to embarrass them in front of anyone, even dope fiends. Teddy took the express and drove over to the west side. He was too busy driving to examine the dresses Terry pulled out of her purse. The other addicts in the car quickly gave him their opinion of the clothes. From their admiration, he knew that he could get good money off of them. He left the freeway at Grand River and turned right. He parked a block away from Linwood and climbed out of the car, taking the clothes with him. When Terry started to follow, he waved her back. "You wait in the car, baby. We'll be back shortly. The fence don't like too many new faces coming up." Snake pulled the record player out of the back. "You can wait too," he said to the other two addicts. "Bullshit!" Red and Tiny Tim both said together. Both addicts climbed out and followed them down the street. For a brief moment, Terry was tempted to go. She was quite aware that Teddy was planning on playing on her for the dresses. She stayed in the car and sat staring out of the windshield with unseeing eyes. Her mind was too occupied with the problem of trying to figure out what she could tell her father about the car. If she told him Teddy had wrecked it, he will go through the ceiling. It would be better to just say that she had left it parked, and when she came back, someone had backed into it. It wasn't long before Teddy and his group reappeared, arguing amongst themselves over the money. Teddy got in and started up the motor. "How much do you get for those outfits I gave you?" she asked curiously. "I had to accept 1/3 of the original price," he said quickly. "But since the man had some dope, I just took a 4 for dope for my share." "You know, I told you this afternoon, Teddy, that I would have to have some money because I had to pay the car note." She glared up at him. "How many times I got to tell you, Terry, you don't tell me anything. I'm the man, and as long as I'm your man, you'll stay in the bitch's place." She tried another approach. "I know you're the man, Teddy, but you use the car as much as I do, and you know it's in my daddy's name." She hated the whining sound in her voice. "If I don't come up with some money this week, he's going to take the car away from me until I show him I know how to pay my bills." "Use your paycheck, bitch," he replied facetiously. "You get a check every week." "Pimp hard, nigga, pimp hard," Tim said loudly from the back. Terry remained silent the rest of the trip. She was consumed with blind anger. "All right, big shot," she told herself coldly. "Just have your fun. Every day ain't the same, and I'll bet I'll be around to see better days than this." He pulled into a motel and parked beside Snake's old car. "We might as well go in your joint and split up the skag," Teddy said. Snake opened the car door and got out. "You might as well come in, Terry, since we're going to be a while." He grinned and held the door open for her. As she climbed out, he stared straight in her eyes. It was all there for a man to see. The handwriting was on the wall. Teddy had oversported his hand. "That's the last thing I want is another dope fiend," she thought as she saw the look in his eye. He took her arm and led her towards the motel. Teddy, watching the little byplay, smiled. He was too confident in his hold on Terry to distrust her. They had been together so long he had begun to think he controlled her completely. Snake opened the door and they all marched in. They sat around and shot up their shares of the dope while Terry snorted the pile Teddy had given her. When everyone was finished, Snake got up to leave. "If it's cool with you, Snake, me and Terry will lay up a while. I still got some stuff, so I'll lock up when we get finished." "Just don't mess up my sheets," Snake said, and led his friends out of the motel room. After they left, Teddy pulled his clothes off and sprawled out on the bed in his shorts. "Take that shit off, Terry. Ain't no sense in you getting it wrinkled up before we leave," he ordered. As she slowly undressed, she watched him measure out 2 piles of heroin from the 4th of dope he had. He had one small pile and held it out towards her. She could feel her eyelids growing heavy from the earlier drug. "Is it all right if I take that home for in the morning, Teddy?" she asked sweetly. "If I want you to have something for in the morning, I'll give it to you. If you don't want this, just say so. I can just as easy put it in my cooker." He stared at her coldly as she removed the last of her clothes. "Take them panties and bra off too." She hesitated briefly. "I'll keep this, Teddy," she replied, moving the small pile of dope out of his reach. She stretched out on the bed and set the dope on the nightstand. She wiggled out of her panties and twisted around so he could unsnap her bra. This would be the last time Teddy would have a chance to do anything to her or for her, she told herself coldly. She gritted her teeth. It had already become an unpleasant task. Teddy cooked his dope and shot it up before turning to her. He ran his fingers slowly down her body, starting at her neck, and followed the path his finger took with light kisses. She lay beside him passively. When he drew his head back up and kissed her, he found her lips cold and unresisting. Her coldness aroused his anger, so he mounted her with the intention of riding her roughly, but he couldn't get a hard up. The heroin had taken effect. He had laid between her legs and moved slowly. His hips rotated in a grinding motion. He continued until he believed he had an erection. He reached down and tried to force his limp penis inside her. She remained still, as though she were a corpse. For a moment he nodded. The strong drug taking effect, he allowed his head to drop between her tits. Her stillness aroused his anger further. He began to run his tongue down over her body intimately. Before he could perform cunnilingus on her, she squeezed her legs together. "Bitch, open your goddamn legs," he ordered. She shook her head angrily. You ain't about to do nothing like that to me, Teddy, she replied sharply. If you act more like a woman than a fucking piece of wood, it wouldn't be necessary, he yelled. He climbed back up. I know what you need, he said, and sat up on her chest when his penis aimed at her mouth. She twisted her face to the side, trying to avoid being forced into an act of fellatio. Teddy slapped her viciously across the face. Open your goddamn mouth, bitch, he yelled. If you force me, she replied, her voice muffled by the pillow, I promise you one thing, Teddy. When I get through, you won't ever stick it in anyone else's mouth because I'm gonna bite that motherfucker off. Bite it off, he screamed and slapped her ruthlessly. I'll teach you to tell me what you're gonna do. She screamed and jumped from the bed. Terry covered her head as he punched at her face. He hit her twice on the neck and a couple of times on the top of the head, but she managed to avoid any facial blows. Get the fuck out of my eyesight, Dopefiend ass bitch, he yelled beside himself. When a bitch gets so sorry she can't even make her man get his dick hard, she ain't no use. His anger was directed more at himself than at Terry. To cover his shame at not being able to function as a young man should, he exploded in a blind rage. Terry grabbed her clothes and ran into the bathroom, locking the door. After she dressed, she waited a few moments before coming out. And when she re-entered the room, Teddy was busy shooting dope. She stared at him coldly. There was really no anger over what had happened. She was too happy that it had ended. She knew that this was really the end. I need the keys to my car, Teddy, she said as she opened the door leading to the street. I ain't giving you nothing, Teddy replied slowly, nodding all the time. She stared at him silently for a moment. I know you ain't crazy, Teddy. Ain't no way for you to take that car and get away with it. When I go home and tell my father what happened, he ain't going hardly come out in the streets looking for you. All he gonna do is call the police station and report it stolen. Do you want that to happen? She asked as a last resort. You done took my money tonight, Teddy. What else do you want to take my father's car to? He didn't reply. He just continued to sit on the bed, nodding. She eased back in the room and picked up his pants. She found the key in his pocket. She felt some money, but was too frightened to take it. She slowly backed out of the room. Terry slammed the door behind her and ran to her car. She locked both doors after jumping in and rolled up the windows. She didn't begin to breathe easier until she drove away from the motel. She debated with herself as to whether or not she should get Billy, but decided to be thankful the affair hadn't ended any worse than it had. This concludes this part of the miniseries on Ralph Reads. I would like to thank you, queens and kings, fellow royalty, for stopping by. You can connect with me via Twitter and Instagram, as well as Periscope at rgmc2407. Drop me an email over to rgmc2407@gmail.com. If you would like to leave a small donation, you may do so at paypal.me/rgmc2407 or the Cash App. My cash tag is rgmc2407. You may also find me on my very own channel, RGMC Ralph Garcia, Master of Ceremonies, as well as right here at home on the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Fellow royalty, pick up a good book, read a good story, and set your good self free. I appreciate you and love you like cooked food. I will see you folks on the next edition of Ralph Reads. Be easy.